You have a lot of supports on the website. What is a support oil?
A support oil is usually targeting something specific, like their sleep support or memory support. So it's usually a combination of oils that's very specific to a particular function or a particular system that helps to go through and treat something in particular. So it can be used as like prevention or like a tonic, or in times where there's a little bit of issue or a crisis in a particular system, or there's a symptom that's arising, you could use it to go through and treat that. Yeah, so try to make it almost so that the name kind of tells you like what it does and how, when to use it, I guess you could say,
Same question, just with Supreme.
Supremes uh, are the same plant from different regions in the world, so like, you take like hyssop, for example. The hyssop supreme is still hyssop, but it's hyssop from Croatia, it's hyssop from Bulgaria, it's hyssop from Spain, it's hyssop from France. There's one. I don't remember if we have a French one still or not, but there's like 4 or 5 different hyssops in it. And so the idea being that they all have kind of different aromatic notes. And so, it kind of gives you a full spectrum that way, but the plant will develop some properties based on the environment that it's in. And so by taking things from different regions, you put it together and it potentially increases the potency by maybe 3 or 4 times because you're taking it from all these different environments. So it's more of a full spectrum version of that plant. Where if you have something where it's just like, lavender is a good example. Like if it's at high altitude and dry versus low altitude and moist, still the same plant, but they are going to have differences. There is going to be nuances that are going to be different. And because of the high altitude, they don't have to use as much heat to distill it. So there's actually even some chemicals, the chemistry of the plant can actually be different. So it's not just the energy or the fragrance, but the chemistry of the end product can be different because of the fluctuations and elevation, for example. And so you take something that's high altitude from like the desert versus high altitude versus like say Kashmir, which is a very fancy lavender that comes out of Kashmir, or a high altitude lavender that comes out of Europe. They're all high altitude, but the environments were all different. And so even with high altitude, they're going to have very different properties. Like if you look at from the point of view of energy, the high altitude that comes out of Kashmir, it's a real deep violet with no blue prana in it. It's very good for like nervous tension. It's very good for cleansing. It's very good for the nervous system, the immune system, things like this, the psyche, you could say. Then you come to there's a lavender that comes out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and not a lot. There's just a little tiny bit of it, but there's still some, right? And still super high altitude. I mean, Santa Fe is 7,000 feet, so it's high altitude. For something to be considered high altitude, it has to be 5,000 feet or above, right? So it's a couple thousand feet over that. And so because that it's in the desert, it's actually very little violet prana. It's almost all blue because it's in this hot, dry environment. And so the plant has to produce a different kind of chemistry to be able to survive in that particular environment. And so, you can say like, oh, let's use a little bit of this for a certain kind of thing, but in other situations, we'll use the other one, or, you just mash them all together and put them together, and you get kind of the best of all the worlds in a supreme like that. And so anything that is a supreme is different regions contributing to that plant. Sometimes they might be slight variations of like fir, for example. There's some slight variations of fir that we compiled all together, so you get, a full spectrum fir rather than, having to pick and choose which fir to use. And so, yeah. Supremes are very nice. They're usually 3 to 4 times more potent. Some of them are actually even up to 5 or 6 times more potent.
And how about premium?
Premium, is that usually just blends
Those
or
actually are black label ones.
right? But is that usually blends? I can't remember.
Yeah, usually, yeah. I don't know.
So
Premium, that's not.
premiums are
Well, we have this frankincense premium, which is just a
Right.
single.
So it can be either like a super fancy version of a single oil, like we have the Siberian fir, and then there's a Siberian fir premium, which is just a fancy way of saying like it came from a different region. And, sometimes the distillation process is a little different or it comes out a little different. So it's a little fancier. And also usually premiums are a little bit harder to get, because they're fancy and they're like usually low yield. And then for the blends, like say, we're doing a protection versus protection premium. It's the same idea, but we use more premium oils to make it, like more fancier oils. And so like sometimes like a protection or one of the angels, I'll do kind of like a normal blend. And then if we kind of cast aside like, oh, let's try to keep it within a certain price range and really swing for the fences as far as effect, and then figure out what it's going to cost afterwards. Those usually tend to be the more premiums. They're usually precious oils involved in making the blends. And so yeah.
It is time. They were saying, and also complexes. But
Yeah, complex is usually an oil might be especially good to treat a particular thing, but needs to be augmented a little bit with some other plants, but is still like mostly the primary way to treat something. And so I usually make that a complex.